Maria, the aged voice, fragile and strained, reached out, her trembling hands reaching for my face. Her eyes, though clouded by age and illness, burned with a desperate vitality that contradicted the stark prognosis on her chart. "Maria," she croaked. "You came back. After all these years, you came back." I wasn't Maria. Maria had been gone for 53 years, a lifetime swallowed by the past. But standing there in the sterile, antiseptic air of that memory care facility, with Sanaa Moretti clutching my hands as if I were her only lifeline, a decision crystallized, a path forged in the crucible of the moment. "I'm here," I whispered, my voice barely audible, a promise echoing in the silent room. "I'm right here." Behind me, a sharp intake of breath cut through the stillness. Enzo Moretti, a name whispered in hushed tones throughout New York's underbelly, a man who held sway over the city's shadowed corners, stood frozen in the doorway. He was his mother's son, yet she hadn't recognized him in 2 years. His face, a carefully constructed mask, fractured, revealing a fleeting glimpse of shock, a flicker of desperate hope, and something else, something darker, a primal hunger that sent a shiver down my spine. That was 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since I had unwittingly stepped into this family's unraveling drama, becoming a fragile bridge between a dying woman and the dangerous son she no longer remembered. 3 weeks since I had shed the cloak of invisibility, stepping into the light of essentiality. And now someone wanted me silenced permanently. But I'm getting ahead of myself, plunging into the deep end before even dipping a toe. Let me rewind. Let me take you back to the beginning. Let me tell you the improbable tale of how a failed scientist, her dreams shattered, became the one person a mafia boss would kill to protect. Let me tell you about the day I met Enzo Moretti, a meeting that would irrevocably alter the course of my life. The sound, a ragged, broken exhale, reached me before I saw him, carrying the weight of a soul cracking under immense pressure. I looked up from the stack of intake paperwork at the nurse's station, my heart already sinking. And then I saw him. Enzo Moretti was a man too large, too imposing for the delicate, pastel-colored waiting room of the Sanaa Moretti Memory Care Wing. His tailored suit, undoubtedly expensive, couldn't mask the inherent violence coiled in his broad shoulders, the crushing grief etched into the curve of his spine as he stood with his head hung low. He was burying his face in his hands, a gesture so raw, so vulnerable, that it momentarily short-circuited my survival instincts, overriding every warning bell screaming in my head. I wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. 3 weeks prior, I was Dr. Elena Vasquez, lead researcher at the Boston Institute for Neurodegenerative Disorders. I had dedicated 6 years of my life to developing a groundbreaking, albeit controversial, theory about emotional memory. Its persistence in Alzheimer's patients, the radical notion that certain emotional connections could endure even when cognitive function crumbled. My colleagues found it interesting, a polite euphemism for irrelevant. My funding committee deemed it speculative, a death knell for my research. My department head, with a patronizing pat on the shoulder, called it career suicide. When my lab was shuttered and my research dreams died a quiet, bureaucratic death, I did what desperate people do. I retreated to the beginning. Before the PhD, before the meaningless accolades, I was a caregiver. I had put myself through college changing bedpans and holding the hands of the forgotten, finding a strange solace in their vulnerability. The work was brutal, underpaid, and undeniably honest. The Moretti facility was none of those things. It was private, exclusive, and paid 3 times the market rate. In this gilded corner of New York, where the brownstones had bulletproof windows and the cars came with armed drivers, you learned not to ask about the source of the money. Gloria, the charge nurse, a woman whose face was a roadmap of hard-won wisdom, caught my eye and gave a subtle shake of her head. A silent warning, don't engage, don't make yourself visible. But invisibility had always been my default setting, my carefully constructed armor. At 34, I was expertly forgettable. Plain features, dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, glasses I didn't strictly need but wore because they instilled a false sense of trust and patience. I had cultivated ordinariness like a survival skill. I should have heeded Gloria's warning. Instead, propelled by a mixture of misplaced compassion and a desperate need to feel useful, I poured a cup of coffee from the perpetually lukewarm staff pot and sat down next to Enzo Moretti. He looked up, startled. His eyes were the color of dark espresso, red-rimmed but dry, sharp enough to slice through steel despite the palpable grief etched on his face. He was brutal in his beauty, all hard angles and a jawline chiseled from marble. A thin, white scar bisected his left eyebrow, a silent testament to a life lived on the edge, where violence was not an accident, but an inevitability. He assessed me with a predator's stillness, cataloging, categorizing, judging. "You're new," he stated, his voice low, roughened, with a subtle Mediterranean accent that hinted at sun-drenched shores and ancient secrets. "Started this morning," I replied, holding out the coffee. "You looked like you needed this more than I do." He didn't take it immediately. His eyes, intense and probing, moved over my face, lingered on my ill-fitting scrubs, then settled on the ID badge clipped to my pocket. "Drivey Vasquez." He read, his voice flat. "Specialized care." He paused, a flicker of something unreadable in his gaze as he lingered on the doctor part. "You're a doctor," was, "Now I'm a caregiver." Life has a twisted sense of humor. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition, a fleeting acknowledgement of shared disappointment. He finally took the coffee, his fingers brushing mine in the transfer. I felt the calluses, the carefully controlled strength, the undeniable power that radiated from him. This was not a man who had ever sat meekly behind a desk. "My mother," he began, then stopped, the words catching on something jagged and painful deep inside. He tried again, his voice raw with emotion. "She doesn't know me anymore. Today she looked at me and screamed, called me an intruder, begged them to make me leave." I had witnessed this heartbreaking scene countless times before. The cruelest stage of the disease when loved ones become sources of terror, their familiar faces twisted into menacing masks. There was no comfort I could offer that wouldn't ring hollow, a platitude in the face of profound loss. So, instead, I told him the truth, the scientific truth I clung to in the face of despair. "The disease takes episodic memory first," I explained, my voice quiet but firm. "Your name, your history, your face. But emotional memory, the felt sense of connection, can persist longer. She may not know you're her son, but somewhere deep inside, she might still feel that you matter." He stared at me, his eyes searching, and I instantly regretted my words. This wasn't my role. I was here to change sheets and document decline, not to lecture the grieving family about the intricacies of neuroscience. But instead of dismissing me, of shutting me down with a withering look, Enzo Moretti leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You studied this," he stated, not as a question but as a statement of fact. "Before I studied the inside of unemployment offices, yes." The corner of his mouth twitched, a fleeting hint of amusement that briefly transformed his face, revealing a glimpse of the younger, less hardened man beneath the formidable exterior. "What would it take to have you assigned specifically to my mother's care?" The question was simple, direct, but the weight behind it was immense, a silent declaration of power, a command veiled as a request. I heard the expectation, the ingrained certainty that reality would bend to his will. But beneath the arrogance, I detected something else, something raw, something desperate. "That's not really how it works," I began, but he cut me off, his voice low and laced with steel. "The director answers to me, as does everyone in this building. I funded it. I named it for her. I would buy her the world if the world could bring her back." He looked towards the window, his gaze lost in the sprawling cityscape beyond. "But the world can't. So I buy her comfort. And now I'm asking you, Dr. Vasquez, will you be part of that comfort?" Every instinct screamed danger. Proximity to this man, entanglement in his world, would undoubtedly destroy my carefully constructed, invisible life. But then I thought of my abandoned research, my shelved theories, the years of dedication poured into a field that had ultimately rejected me. I thought of the possibility, however slim, that I might learn something here, something that could potentially change everything. And maybe, if I'm being brutally honest with myself, I thought of how it felt to be looked at by Enzo Moretti and truly seen, as if I were something more than a piece of furniture, something worthy of his attention. "Tell me about your mother?" I said, my voice barely a whisper, sealing my fate with those 4 words. He studied me with that same unsettling, predatory assessment, as if peeling back layers I didn't even know I possessed. Then he made a decision. I saw it happen, the slight relaxation of his shoulders, the almost imperceptible nod, the subtle shift in his demeanor. "Her name is Sanaa," he said, his voice softening slightly. "She's 73. Born in a small village outside Naples. Came to this country with nothing but faith and stubbornness. Raised me alone after my father died. Worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table." His voice caught, raw with emotion. "She never let me see her cry. Not once. No matter how bad things got. She was the strongest person I've ever known. And now she doesn't even know my name." The grief in his voice had its own gravity, a force that pulled me towards him despite every warning blaring in my head. "I'll need full access to her medical history," I heard myself say, my voice betraying a hint of the scientist reawakening within me. "And time not just for routine care, but for observation, for interaction. I want to understand how she processes emotional stimuli. You'll have whatever you need." He stood, and I realized just how tall he was, well over 6 feet, built like a man who had learned to fight before he learned to read. He extended his hand, his gaze unwavering. "We have an agreement, Dr. Vasquez." I took it, my palm tingling at the contact. His grip was firm, careful, controlled, radiating both strength and an underlying tension. "Elena," I corrected, my voice slightly breathless. "If we're working closely, you should call me Elena." "Elena." He tested the name on his tongue, and something warm, something undeniably dangerous, moved through me, a sensation I firmly ignored. "I'll be here every day watching. My mother is all I have left." He released my hand and walked towards the exit, his silhouette framed in the doorway. At the threshold, he paused without turning. "Thank you for the coffee," he said, his voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "And for not lying to me about hope." Then he was gone, leaving me alone in the sterile waiting room, clutching the cold cup I had meant for him, wondering what exactly I had just agreed to, what Pandora's box I had just pried open. Sanaa Moretti's room looked less like a hospital room and more like a shrine to a life in decline. Photographs covered every available surface. Sanaa as a fiery young woman on a ship's deck, the New York harbor shimmering behind her. Sanaa in a simple wedding dress, radiant with joy, holding an infant with transformative tenderness, and countless images of Sanaa with Enzo at every age, always wearing the same expression of fierce, protective love. The woman in the bed bore little resemblance to those vibrant images. Sanaa was thin now, frail in a way that seemed impossible for someone who had once radiated such indomitable strength. Her white hair was thin and brittle, her skin papery, her hands moving restlessly on the blanket, fingers plucking at invisible threads. I approached slowly, making sure my footsteps were audible, announcing my presence like a wary animal approaching its prey. "Mrs. Moretti," I said gently, my voice calm and reassuring. "My name is Elena. I'm going to be helping take care of you." Her eyes opened, dark brown, almost black, pupils dilated with age. For a long moment, there was nothing, just vacancy, a blank slate where recognition should have been. Then something shifted, a flicker of awareness, a spark igniting in the darkness. Her gaze focused on my face with an intensity that made me freeze, every muscle tense. "Maria," she whispered, the name a prayer on her lips, a desperate plea echoing from the depths of her forgotten past. The name hit me physically, a jolt of unexpected electricity. I had read her file, meticulously reviewing every detail. Maria had been Sanaa's sister, dead for over 40 years, killed in a tragic car accident in Naples before Sanaa had immigrated to America. There were no photographs of Maria anywhere in the facility. I had checked, a subconscious attempt to understand the woman I was about to care for. "No, Mrs. Moretti," I said gently, forcing myself to break eye contact. "I'm Elena. I'm one of your caregivers." But Sanaa wasn't listening. Lost in the labyrinth of her memories, she reached out with trembling hands, her fingers finding my face, tracing my features with desperate tenderness, as if trying to reconstruct a lost masterpiece. "Maria, Maria, you came," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion. "I knew you would. I waited so long." Her Italian was rapid, musical, tinged with a southern accent and laced with the pain of old grief. Tears spilled down her weathered cheeks, carving new lines into her already furrowed skin. Her hands cupped my face as if I were something precious, miraculous, a beacon of hope in her encroaching darkness. The protocol, the rigid rules ingrained in me through years of training, dictated that I redirect and avoid reinforcing delusions gently, guide her back to reality without causing further distress. But the look in her eyes, the raw, overwhelming joy that illuminated her face, stopped the clinical words in my throat. This woman, robbed of her memories, had spent 8 years trapped in a fog of confusion and fear. And now, for the first time in months, according to her chart, she was present, connected, happy. "I'm here," I heard myself say, my voice catching in my throat, betraying my own emotional turmoil. "I'm right here." Sanaa pulled me closer, her grip surprisingly strong for a woman so frail. I sat on the edge of her bed as she clutched my hands and wept with relief, her body shaking with pent-up emotion. She spoke in rapid Italian, a torrent of memories and emotions that had been dammed up for decades, finally finding an outlet. She spoke of their childhood, picking olives in their grandmother's grove, their mother's cooking, the way the whole village smelled like tomatoes and basil in the summer. A boy named Paolo, who had courted them both, vying for their attention with stolen glances and shy smiles. I understood perhaps half of what she was saying, my functional Italian struggling to keep up with the speed and intensity of her outpouring. But I didn't need to understand every word. I understood the emotion, the profound relief, the sense of homecoming that radiated from her. She talked for nearly an hour, her voice gaining strength as she relived those long-forgotten moments. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the light dimmed, the connection faded. Her grip loosened, her gaze went vague, drifting back into the fog. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice tinged with polite confusion. "Are you one of the new nurses?" "Yes, Mrs. Moretti," I replied, my voice soft and reassuring. "My name is Elena." "That's nice," she said, already drifting away, her eyes fluttering closed. "Very nice." She was asleep within minutes, her face peaceful in a way the chart indicated it rarely was. I sat watching her breathe, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had just transpired. This wasn't supposed to happen. Recognition of deceased relatives was common in patients with advanced dementia, but it was usually accompanied by distress, by fear, not by the overwhelming joy and sustained engagement I had just witnessed. The coherent narrative, the emotional accessibility, these were extraordinary, defying everything I had learned in my years of study. My abandoned research, my discredited theory about emotional memory persistence, what I had just witnessed was exactly the evidence I had spent years searching for, a living testament to the power of connection. An unidentified trigger had unlocked something, bypassed the cognitive damage, and released a flood of memories the disease was supposed to have destroyed. I was so absorbed in my thoughts, so completely consumed by the implications of what had just happened, that I didn't hear the door open. "She's sleeping." Enzo's voice, a low rumble that vibrated through the small room, made me jump, pulling me back to reality. He stood in the doorway, his face unreadable, his expression carefully controlled, but his eyes moved from his mother's peaceful expression to my hands, still held loosely in hers, conveying a silent question. "She recognized you," he said quietly, his voice laced with a fragile hope. "No," I corrected, shaking my head, trying to temper his expectations. "She thought I was someone else, someone named Maria." The effect was immediate. The color drained from Enzo's face, his carefully constructed composure cracking before he rebuilt it, steeling himself against disappointment. Maria was her sister, he explained, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. She died before I was born. My mother never spoke of her, not once in my entire life. I only learned the name from old documents after she got sick. She spoke about her today for almost an hour. Childhood memories, stories I don't think she's told anyone in decades. She was present, Mr. Moretti. Truly present, then gone again. He moved into the room slowly, his eyes fixed on his mother's sleeping face, as if afraid to break the spell. He sat in the chair opposite me, his body rigid with tension, struggling with something, hope warring with the fear of hoping, desperate for a miracle. She doesn't do this with anyone else, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Not the nurses, not the doctors, not me. She hasn't had a lucid period in months. I know. I read her chart. Then how do you explain it? Couldn't. Not yet. But the scientist in me, the part one thought I had buried under layers of disappointment and resignation, was reawakening, fueled by a spark of possibility. I don't know, I admitted, but I'm going to find out. He looked at me then, really looked, the way he had in the waiting room, piercing through my carefully constructed ordinariness, seeing past the surface to something deeper, something underneath. It was uncomfortable, thrilling, undeniably hazardous. My mother hasn't responded to anyone the way she responded to you, he said, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. Not since before she forgot my name. He paused, his gaze intense, searching. What are you, Elena Vasquez? A caregiver with a research background and too many questions. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now. He was quiet for a long moment, his eyes never leaving my face, weighing, measuring, assessing. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, black with stark silver lettering, the epitome of understated power. He placed it on the bedside table, the gesture deliberate, significant. My personal number, he said, his voice low. If anything changes with her, day or night, I want to know. If you discover why she responds to you, I want to know that too. I picked up the card, the heavy, expensive stock cool against my fingertips. Only his name and a phone number. No title, no company, no address, no indication of who or what Enzo Moretti actually was, though I was beginning to form suspicions I didn't want to examine, dark and dangerous suspicions that sent a shiver of both fear and excitement down my spine. I'll keep you informed, I said, my voice barely audible. See that you do. He stood, towering over me, looking down at his sleeping mother, his expression raw, unguarded, revealing a vulnerability he usually kept hidden. A son's love stripped bare by loss, the fierce devotion in his eyes undeniable. She's all I have, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She's all I've ever had. Then he left, disappearing back into the shadows, leaving me alone with Sanaa, her breathing slow and steady, the only sound in the quiet room. My mind was spinning, reeling from the events of the past few hours, the implications of the agreement I had just made. I looked at the card in my hand, the dark ink glinting in the dim light. I should throw it away, request reassignment, run as far as my practical, invisible life could take me. I should protect myself, preserve the fragile semblance of normalcy I had painstakingly constructed. Instead, I slipped the card into my pocket, the cool weight a constant reminder of the path I had chosen, the risks I was willing to take. I sat back beside my sleeping patient, watching her chest rise and fall with each breath, and began to plan, the scientist within me fully awakened, ready to unravel the mysteries hidden within Sanaa Moretti's mind. The next 3 weeks unfolded in a pattern that defied everything I had learned, everything documented in the medical literature. Every morning at 6, before the chaos of the day shift descended, I entered Sanaa's room, my heart pounding with a mixture of anticipation and trepidation. Every morning, she looked at me with those dark, unseeing eyes and called me Maria, the name a key unlocking a door to a forgotten past. And every morning, for a window that varied from 20 minutes to 2 hours, she was present, lucid, engaged, in a way her chart said was medically impossible, a phenomenon that challenged the very foundation of my understanding of dementia. I documented everything with scientific precision, driven by an almost obsessive need to understand the underlying mechanisms at play. Time of day mattered. Morning sessions invariably produced longer, more lucid periods, as if the early morning light held some restorative power. Physical touch accelerated recognition. If I held her hand within the first minute of entering the room, she found Maria faster and stayed longer, the physical connection acting as a conduit to her fragmented memories. Music helped. An old Italian radio station playing songs from the 1950s and 60s, the melodies echoing from her youth, would clear her eyes, sharpen her focus, and her cracked voice would sing along, the words a testament to a life lived and loved. But always Maria, never Elena, the misidentification a constant puzzle I was determined to solve. I pulled every photograph of Maria from the facility's sparse archives, searching for a clue, a visual connection that could explain the consistent misidentification. The faded images showed a young woman with dark hair and a serious expression, her features etched with the hardships of a life lived during wartime. She looked nothing like me. Different coloring, different features, different build. There was no physical resemblance to explain why Sanaa consistently saw her sister when she looked at me. So what was it? I tested variables with the rigor of a seasoned researcher, transforming Sanaa's room into a makeshift laboratory. I changed my perfume, then stopped wearing any at all, eliminating olfactory triggers. No effect. I styled my hair differently, up, down, covered, experimenting with various looks to alter my appearance. No effect. I wore different colors, spoke in various tones, approached from multiple angles, altering every conceivable aspect of my presentation. Nothing changed the fundamental equation. Sanaa saw me. Sanaa saw Maria. The answer, when it finally came, arrived unexpectedly on a Thursday morning, 3 weeks and 4 days into my experiment. Sanaa was lucid, engaged in a detailed narrative about the lemon trees in their family courtyard, recalling the scent of the blossoms and the taste of the tart fruit. She spoke of how Maria used to climb them despite their mother's scolding, her voice filled with a mixture of amusement and nostalgia. Then she stopped mid-sentence, her gaze fixed on my face, her eyes filled with an expression I hadn't seen before, a knowingness that transcended the disease. "You have her heart," she said in Italian, her voice barely a whisper. "The same heart. I can feel it." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice trembling with anticipation. Maria was brave, strong. She never let anyone suffer alone. When other children were cruel, she fought them, defending the weak with unwavering courage. When I was sick, she slept on the floor beside my bed, watching over me with tireless devotion. When I was afraid, she held my hand and told stories until the fear went away. Sanaa's eyes were bright with unshed tears, her voice filled with a love that had spanned decades. "You do these things, Elena. You stay when others leave. You touch when others are afraid. You have her heart." I sat very still, my breath caught in my throat, a cold, electric current coursing through my veins. Not appearance, not voice, not gesture, but something far more profound. An emotional signature, the way I moved through the world, the way I related to her, the quality of presence I brought to our interactions. Sanaa's damaged brain couldn't recognize faces, names, or recent memories, the cognitive pathways destroyed by the relentless progression of the disease. But it could still read something deeper, something the disease hadn't touched. An emotional resonance, a shared empathy, a connection forged in the crucible of human experience. She was recognizing a pattern of care, a way of being that reminded her so strongly of her sister that her brain had made the connection and refused to let go. My theory was correct. Emotional memory persisted, enduring even when cognitive function crumbled. And I was living proof, a vessel carrying the echoes of a love that had transcended time and death. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Enzo's voice startled me, shattering the profound silence that had settled over the room. He was standing in the doorway, as he increasingly was during my morning sessions, his presence a constant reminder of the complex and dangerous world I had stepped into. His visits had become more frequent, evolving from evening check-ins to afternoon observations, and now, mornings, his dark, unreadable eyes watching, assessing, scrutinizing every interaction between his mother and me. I think I understand, I said, my voice breathless with discovery, my mind racing with the implications of what I had just realized. I think I know why she recognizes me. His expression sharpened, the hard lines of his face tightening, as if bracing himself for bad news. He stepped inside, closing the door with a soft click that felt significant, isolating us in the small room. Tell me, he commanded, the word laced with a barely suppressed urgency. So I did. I explained my theory, my years of research, my detailed observations of Sanaa's behavior, the subtle cues and triggers that seemed to unlock her memories. I talked about emotional memory, pattern recognition, how trauma and love could imprint at levels that conscious memory couldn't touch, creating pathways that bypassed the damage caused by the disease. I talked too much, the words spilling out in a torrent of unusual enthusiasm, driven by the need to share my discovery, to validate my long-held beliefs. But Enzo listened without interrupting, his eyes never leaving my face, his gaze intense and unwavering, as if he could somehow absorb my knowledge simply by looking at me. When I finally ran out of words, breathless and exhilarated, he was quiet for a long moment, processing everything I had told him, weighing the implications of my words. You're saying my mother recognizes you because of who you are, not what you look like, he finally said, his voice low and thoughtful, repeating my words back to me. Because of how you make her feel. Essentially, yes, I confirmed, nodding eagerly. The disease destroyed her cognitive pathways for identification, but emotional pathways remain intact. She can't remember I'm her caregiver, but she can feel that I care. And that feeling is so reminiscent of her sister that her brain bridged the gap, creating a false memory, a connection to the past. Maria died when my mother was 19, over 50 years ago, he said, his voice tinged with disbelief. And you're saying that connection is still there, still accessible after everything the disease has taken? That's exactly what I'm saying, I replied, my voice firm, my conviction unwavering. He turned away, moving to the window, his silhouette dark against the morning light, the image a study in contrasts. I watched the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands curled into fists, the raw emotion etched on his face. When I visit her, he said quietly, his voice laced with pain. She screams. She calls for help. She looks at me like I'm a monster. He paused, years of unspoken hurt and frustration weighing heavy in his silence. I'm her son. I've loved her my whole life. Why can't she feel that? The question was raw, wounded, a plea for understanding that transcended his carefully constructed facade. This wasn't just about his mother's disease, about the cognitive decline that had robbed her of her memories. This was about him, about everything he was and everything he had become, about the love he had so fiercely protected and the rejection he now faced. I don't know, I said honestly, my voice soft with empathy, but I'd like to find out if you'll let me. He turned back, his eyes searching my face, his gaze piercing, questioning my motives. In the morning light, his features were softer, the hard edges blurred by shadow and emotion, making him look younger, almost vulnerable. What would you need? He asked, his voice barely a whisper. Time, access, resources to document this systematically, I replied, my heart pounding in my chest. I hesitated, then pushed forward, driven by a combination of scientific curiosity and a growing sense of responsibility. I need to understand who she was before the disease, who you were to her. There might be something in your relationship, some emotional signature triggering fear instead of recognition. His jaw tightened, the hard lines returning to his face. You want to psychoanalyze my relationship with my mother? I want to understand why she can feel her dead sister in a stranger, but can't feel her living son. I countered, my voice firm, refusing to be intimidated. And I want to see if there's a way to change that, to help her remember the love you shared. Silence stretched between us, thick with unspoken things, the air charged with a tension that was both unsettling and exhilarating. I watched him wrestle with the decision, his pride warring with his desperation, the conflicting emotions playing out on his face. Finally, he nodded, a slight, almost imperceptible movement that spoke volumes. Tonight, after visiting hours, I'll send a car. A car? I asked, surprised by his response. You want to understand who my mother was, who I was to her? He said, his voice low and intense. The answers aren't in this sterile room. They're in the home she built, the life she lived, the memories she left behind. He moved toward the door, pausing with his hand on the handle, his gaze fixed on my face. I'm trusting you, Elena, with things I don't trust anyone with, he said, his voice laced with a warning. Don't make me regret it. Then he was gone, disappearing into the hallway, leaving me alone with Sanaa, who had fallen asleep during our conversation. Her face peaceful, her lips curved in a faint smile, as if dreaming of a happier time. I looked at the sleeping woman, then at the door her son had just walked through, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I thought about the car that would come tonight, the home I would enter, the secrets I would learn. I was crossing a line, blurring the boundary between professional and personal with every step deeper into this family's complicated world. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to refuse, to back away, to keep a safe distance. Remember, I told myself, I was here for a paycheck and perhaps some informal research, not to become entangled in the messy, dangerous life of a man who carried violence in his hands and grief in his eyes. But Sanaa had called me brave, said I had her sister's heart. Maybe it was time to prove her right, to embrace the challenge, to risk everything for the chance to make a difference. I squeezed her sleeping hand, the gesture a silent promise, and began preparing myself for whatever the night would bring, steeling myself for the unknown. The car was black, sleek, and driven by a man who spoke not a single word during the 40-minute journey, his silence adding to the growing sense of unease I felt. I watched Manhattan's glittering skyline recede in the rearview mirror, replaced by increasingly affluent suburbs, manicured lawns and imposing gates, the trappings of wealth designed to keep the outside world at bay. Then, the landscape transformed entirely, the houses growing larger, the properties disappearing into private darkness, shrouded by towering trees and high walls. We turned onto an unmarked road, a narrow lane that wound through nearly a mile of dense forest, the darkness broken only by the car's headlights. Then, abruptly, the trees opened, revealing a breathtaking sight that stole my breath away. It wasn't a house, it was an estate, a sprawling Italian villa that looked as if it had been transported stone by stone from the sun-drenched hills of Tuscany. Warm light glowed from dozens of windows, illuminating the elegant facade. Fountains danced in the circular drive, their gentle splashing a soothing counterpoint to the silence of the night. Gardens stretched into the darkness, fragrant with night-blooming jasmine, the air heavy with its intoxicating scent. This was where Sanaa Moretti had built her American life, the opulent culmination of her hard work and unwavering determination. This was the kingdom she had created for her son, a sanctuary from the harsh realities of the world. And this was where I was about to learn the secrets, the hidden truths that had shaped this family, for better or for worse. Most people didn't survive knowing those secrets. A chilling thought that echoed in my mind as I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet. Enzo waited at the front door, his presence radiating power and control. He had changed out of his business suit, the armor he wore for the outside world, and into dark trousers and a charcoal sweater, making him look less like a businessman and more like what he actually was. Dangerous, powerful, and tonight, strangely open, his vulnerability a stark contrast to the opulence that surrounded him. You came, he said, his voice low, his gaze searching my face. You sent a car, I replied, forcing a lightness into my tone I didn't feel. Seemed rude to refuse. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, a fleeting expression that hinted at the man beneath the hardened exterior. Come inside, he said, gesturing towards the open door. We have a lot to discuss. The interior was even more impressive than the exterior, a testament to wealth and impeccable taste. Marble floors gleamed under the soft glow of chandeliers, vaulted ceilings soared overhead, and priceless works of art adorned the walls, transforming the house into a veritable museum. But what struck me, what made the house feel like a home and not just a showpiece, were the personal touches, the small details that revealed the lives of the people who lived within these walls. Photographs were everywhere, just like in Sanaa's room, capturing moments of joy, sorrow, and everything in between. The history of a family laid bare for all to see. Handmade Afghans were draped over priceless furniture, adding a touch of warmth and comfort to the otherwise formal setting. Religious icons and family heirlooms were mixed with apparent wealth, creating a unique blend of tradition and modernity. This wasn't just a house, it was a home, built with love and maintained with devotion. A sanctuary filled with memories. Enzo led me to a library at the back of the house, a vast room lined with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, filled with volumes in Italian and English, a testament to the family's rich cultural heritage. A fire crackled merrily in an enormous hearth, casting dancing shadows on the walls, creating a warm and inviting atmosphere. Two leather chairs faced each other before the flames, arranged as if awaiting a conversation. On the table between them sat a bottle of wine and two glasses, the scene carefully arranged. He gestured towards a plush armchair. "Sit down, Elena. This will take some time." I obeyed, settling into the offered seat. Without a word, he poured a generous measure of amber wine into a crystal glass, offering it to me before taking his own. He then positioned himself across from me, the flickering firelight dancing across his face. The flames highlighted the jagged white scar bisecting his strong jawline, a testament to a past I could only imagine. He was like a painting, a warrior at rest, a study in beautiful brutality. "You want to understand my mother," he began, his voice a low rumble. "To do that, you need to understand where she came from, where we came from." He swirled the wine in his glass, his gaze fixed on the hypnotic flames. "What do you know about me, Elena? What rumors have reached your ears?" I considered a carefully constructed lie, something palatable and innocuous. But the atmosphere of the room, the intimacy of the hour, and the sheer weight of what we were attempting demanded a brutal honesty. "I know your wealth doesn't stem from legitimate enterprises," I stated, meeting his gaze. "I know people fear you, and it's not simply because you're socially awkward at parties. I know the research facility was funded with untraceable cash. No questions asked because asking questions would be exceptionally dangerous." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I know what you are, Enzo. I've known since day one." He didn't so much as flinch. If anything, a flicker of relief crossed his features, like a man finally unburdening himself after carrying a weight too long. "And yet," he murmured, a question hanging in the air. "You're still here." "I'm here for your mother," I clarified, my voice firm. "Whatever your dealings, she's simply a woman suffering from a cruel disease. She deserves compassionate care. She deserves to be understood. And perhaps," I added, carefully measuring my words, "she deserves better than a son like you." A sharp intake of breath. "That's what you're thinking, isn't it?" "Not at all," I replied honestly. His eyes narrowed, searching my face, probing for any sign of deception. Finding none, his expression softened, ever so slightly. "My mother arrived in this country with nothing," he began, the narrative unfolding like a carefully guarded secret. "No money, no English, no family. Her sister was gone, taken too young by a fever. Her parents swallowed by the war, 19 years old and utterly alone." He paused, the fire crackling in the silence. "She cleaned houses, scrubbing floors for wealthy families in Brooklyn. 16-hour days, dawn till dusk. She saved every single penny. When she finally had enough, she leveraged her savings and launched a cleaning service catering to businesses instead of private residences. It was all legitimate, every transaction above board. She never broke a single law." He swirled the wine, lost in the memory. "She met my father when she was 25. Victoria Moretti. Handsome, undeniably charming, from a well-respected family in Naples." A shadow crossed his face. What she didn't know was what his family truly did. He paused again, his voice heavy with regret. "By the time she found out the truth, she was pregnant with me, and Victoria was dead." The word hung in the air, a dark and weighty presence. How? I asked softly, already suspecting the answer. Killed by a rival family, he stated flatly. When I was barely 6 months old. Shot in the street, in broad daylight. My mother, she saw it happen. She was holding me in her arms. I set down my wine, the warmth of the fire suddenly inadequate. She could have run, he continued, his gaze unwavering. Taken the insurance money, disappeared. Started over somewhere where the Moretti name meant nothing. But she didn't. She stayed. She raised me in the shadow of what my father was. And she tried, God how she tried, to keep me from becoming the same monster. But you did, I said, the words barely a whisper. Worse, even. My father was a soldier, he conceded, his voice devoid of emotion. I became a general. By 30, I controlled everything he'd only ever dreamed of. And my mother watched it happen, watched her son morph into the very thing she feared most. He rose abruptly, turning his back to me and walking towards the fireplace. The flames cast his shadow long and menacing across the floor. She never uttered a word of condemnation, never voiced her disappointment, though I always knew, she felt it deep in her bones. She went to church every Sunday, lit candles for my soul. She cooked my favorite meals whenever I came home, covered in sin she couldn't see, but somehow always sensed. She loved me unconditionally, even as I became everything she desperately tried to save me from. His voice cracked, a raw vulnerability piercing his carefully constructed facade. He paused, took a deep breath, struggling to regain his composure. When the diagnosis came, I told myself it was punishment. God was taking her from me, piece by agonizing piece, forcing me to watch her forget the son who had failed her so completely. Maybe that's the truth. Maybe I deserve exactly this. He turned back to me, his eyes filled with a pain that went beyond words. Elena, the day she forgot my name, that was the worst day of my life. Worse than my father's death. Worse than anything I've done or had done to me. She looked at me with absolute nothing. No recognition. And in that moment, I realized I'd already lost her. Not to death, not yet, but to something far crueler. She's still alive, still physically here. But the mother who knew me, the woman who was my mother, she's gone. I saw the raw, unguarded grief he usually kept so meticulously hidden, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. That's why she fears you, I said slowly, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. The emotional signature you carry. She can't identify you cognitively, but somewhere deep within her damaged brain, she recognizes the feelings you evoke. I paused, choosing my words with care. And what she feels is guilt, grief. The crushing weight of witnessing her son become someone she never wanted. When she looks at you now, she doesn't see Enzo. She feels a lifetime of complicated love and unspoken disappointment. And to a brain that can no longer process that complexity, it registers as a threat. Enzo stared at me, stunned. Then he sank heavily into the nearest chair, like a puppet whose strings had been abruptly severed. You think she's afraid of me because she loved me too much? He whispered, the question laced with disbelief. Because that love is now too heavy for her to bear? Emotional memory works in both directions, I explained gently. Your presence triggers joy, undoubtedly, but it also unleashes a torrent of pain. Losing her husband, helplessly watching you choose a path she couldn't prevent. The accumulated heartache of loving someone she ultimately couldn't save. I leaned forward, my voice soft but firm. It's not that she doesn't love you, Enzo. It's that loving you hurts too much for her broken mind to endure. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant chime of a clock striking 10. Is there a way to fix it? He asked, his voice rough with desperation. A way to change what she feels when she sees me? I don't know yet, I admitted honestly. But I want to try. He looked at me then with an intensity that stole my breath. Why, Elena? Why do you care so deeply about what happens to a woman you've only known for 3 weeks? To a family stained with blood? Fair question, I conceded, considering my answer carefully. Because your mother is so much more than her disease. Because she deserves peace, not a life consumed by fear. Because the science could offer hope to countless other families battling this insidious illness. I paused, taking a deep breath. And because you love her in a way that absolutely breaks my heart. And I desperately want to see if there's a way to help her feel that love again. He didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached across the space separating us and took my hand. His hand was warm, strong, the grip impossibly gentle. Stay, he said, his voice low and urgent. Not just at the facility. Here, in this house, close to her things, her memories. I'll give you everything you need. Unfettered access, unlimited resources. Just, please, Elena, help me find a way back to my mother before it's too late. I gazed down at our joined hands, then back up at this man who represented everything I should avoid, and yet somehow exactly what I couldn't turn away from. All right, I whispered. I'll stay. I moved into the sprawling estate 3 days later. Enzo had prepared a lavish suite for me in the East Wing. Beautiful rooms adorned with warm wood paneling, sumptuously soft fabrics, and expansive windows overlooking meticulously manicured gardens that stretched seemingly endlessly into the distance. Felt like a gilded cage. But I had walked into it willingly, and the lock, I reminded myself, was one I could open at any time. The first week was devoted entirely to research. I pored over decades of photographs, meticulously examining letters, and poring over official documents. I painstakingly pieced together Sana's life, constructing it with almost archaeological precision. Her childhood in Naples, the stifling poverty that had indelibly shaped her character, the untimely loss of her beloved sister, her arduous arrival in America, the backbreaking work, and the slow, incremental accumulation of success. And then there was Victoria, Enzo's father, a spectral presence haunting every corner of the house. He was present in faded photographs, passionate letters, and even in the very architectural choices of the building. Handsome, undeniably charming, and clearly beloved, despite the darkness that clung to his name. The letters exchanged between Sana and Victoria were filled with a passionate, desperate love, a flame that burned too brightly, too fiercely, to last. He died violently, publicly, leaving Sana a widow with an infant son and a legacy of blood. The more I learned, the deeper my understanding grew. Enzo was all that remained of Victoria, the only tangible piece of her late husband left in the world. She had loved him with the ferocious, all-consuming devotion of someone who had already suffered too many losses. When he chose his father's path, defying her fervent prayers, it must have shattered something within her, a wound that had never truly healed. I spent countless days immersed in the library, surrounded by the artifacts of a life well lived, yet so painfully lost. I spent my evenings at the facility, sitting with Sana, testing various theories, meticulously documenting every lucid moment. And I spent my nights lying awake in my beautiful room, lost in thought about Enzo Moretti and the way he looked at me when he mistakenly believed I wasn't watching. He was a constant presence at the house, materializing in the library doorway with a steaming mug of coffee or a plate of carefully prepared food, casually checking on my progress with an air of nonchalance that did little to conceal his underlying desperation. He was also a fixture at the facility, often sitting silently in a corner of his mother's room, his eyes burning with equal parts hope and gnawing fear as he watched our interactions. We scrupulously avoided discussing anything personal, keeping our conversations strictly focused on Sana, my research, and clinical observations. But the awareness between us grew palpably stronger with each passing day, an almost electric current running beneath the surface of our carefully maintained professionalism. It was during the third week that everything irrevocably changed. I developed a new protocol, a novel approach to bridge the chasm between the positive emotional signature Sana responded to in me and the complex, fraught signature that Enzo carried. The theory was relatively simple. If Sana's brain was relying on emotional pattern recognition rather than traditional facial recognition, perhaps I could act as a translator, a buffer of sorts. Someone whose presence could dilute the overwhelming intensity of Enzo's emotional weight, allowing Sanaa to access the love that lay buried beneath the pain. We decided to implement the new protocol on a Tuesday morning, a time when Sanaa's lucidity typically peaked. I entered the room first, as usual, and waited patiently for her to latch onto Maria. Once she was calm and relatively present, I discreetly signaled to Enzo, who was anxiously waiting just outside. He entered slowly, his movements deliberate and measured, his face carefully devoid of any expression. I watched Sanaa's reaction with unwavering focus, prepared to intervene at the first sign of distress. Her eyes shifted from me to her son. A flicker of familiar confusion began to cloud her features. "It's all right, Sanaa," I said softly, reaching out to take her hand. "This is a friend of mine. He's here to visit." Sanaa looked at Enzo again, her brow furrowed in concentration. I felt the subtle tremor in her fingers, the nascent beginnings of the fear response that usually culminated in screaming and the need for sedation. But I held her hand firmly, anchoring her to me, maintaining a calm and soothing tone in my voice. I allowed the emotional signature she trusted to flow through our physical connection, creating a safe space. "A friend?" she repeated uncertainly, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," I confirmed gently. "A good man. Someone who cares about you very much." Enzo remained frozen, barely daring to breathe. I saw the raw, desperate hope shining in his eyes, the aching desire of a son who simply wanted his mother to look at him without fear. Sanaa studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then, slowly, the tension began to ease from her face. "He has sad eyes," she said to me in Italian, her voice surprisingly clear, "like someone who's lost too much." "He has," I agreed softly. "But he's still here, still fighting." She nodded slowly, accepting this explanation. Then, she looked Enzo directly in the eye and said something that stopped my heart. "You remind me of someone," she murmured, her gaze unfocused, lost in a sea of fragmented memories. "A boy I used to know. He had the same sadness." Enzo's carefully constructed composure shattered. I saw his hands tremble, his eyes suddenly glistening with moisture. "What was his name?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Sanaa frowned, searching through the ruins of her memories. "I don't remember," she admitted, a hint of frustration in her voice. "But I loved him. I loved him very much." The sound that escaped Enzo was somewhere between a choked laugh and a suppressed sob. He moved forward slowly, kneeling beside her bed, bringing himself down to her level. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply looked at him with gentle curiosity and the faintest glimmer of recognition. "Can I hold your hand?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. She considered his request for a moment, then nodded slowly. When his fingers closed around hers, a small, almost childlike smile touched her lips. "Your hands are cold," she observed, her voice gentle. "You should wear gloves." "I will, Mama," he said, the endearment slipping out before he could stop it. But Sanaa didn't react to the name. She simply patted his hand with her free one and looked back at me. "Maria, your friend is sad. We should make him some tea." "That's a wonderful idea," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Why don't you tell him about the lemon trees while I arrange it?" I slipped out of the room, giving them a semblance of privacy, my heart pounding with the sheer magnitude of what had just transpired. Through the small window in the door, I watched Sanaa talking to her son, animated and fully present, her hands moving expressively as she described something only she could see. Enzo listened with rapt attention, his whole body leaning towards her, drinking in every word as if he were a man dying of thirst. It wasn't full recognition. She still didn't know, not consciously, that he was her son. But she wasn't afraid. For the first time in months, she was in the same room with him without any terror or confusion. She was comfortable, even happy. It was a monumental breakthrough. Small, fragile, but undeniably real. I leaned against the wall and released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. My hands were shaking. My eyes were brimming with tears. This was why I had dedicated my life to science. Not for the publications or the grant money, but for moments like this, when understanding led to connection, when knowledge became healing. When Enzo finally emerged from the room, his face was utterly transformed. The hard edges had softened. The constant tension had visibly eased. He looked younger, lighter, like someone who had just set down a burden he had been carrying for years. "She talked to me," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "She held my hand, and she talked to me." "I know," I replied softly. "I saw." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and the gratitude in his eyes was almost painful to witness. "You did this, Elena. Whatever science or magic or miracle you worked, you gave me something I thought was gone forever." "It's not a miracle, Enzo," I insisted gently. "It's simply understanding how the brain processes emotional connections. We can build on this, repeat it, and maybe even expand it." He shook his head dismissively. "Call it what you want. To me, it's nothing short of a miracle, and you made it happen." He stepped closer, invading my personal space, close enough that I could feel the radiating heat of his body, inhale the subtle, sophisticated scent of his cologne. His hand rose to cup my face, the touch surprisingly gentle despite the calluses that spoke of a life of hard labor, the touch tender despite the violence those hands had surely committed. "Elena," he said, and the sound of my name on his lips was like a prayer. "Enzo," I breathed, my voice barely audible. "We shouldn't." "I know," he said, his voice rough. "I know we shouldn't. You work for me. You're here for my mother. This is complicated in ways that could irrevocably destroy everything we've built." His thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone, a feather-light caress. "But I've spent my entire life taking what I wanted without apology. I'm asking now, Elena. I'm asking if you feel what I feel. Asking if there's something here worth the inherent complication." I should have said no. Every rational fiber of my being screamed that this was a colossal mistake. That entanglement with this man could only lead to heartbreak and disaster. But his hand was warm and reassuring on my face. His eyes were filled with something that looked terrifyingly like love. And I had never, not even once in my life, been looked at the way Enzo Moretti looked at me in that moment. "I feel it," I admitted, the words a mere whisper. "I felt it since the very first day." He closed his eyes briefly, a wave of relief washing over his features. When he opened them again, they were darker, more intense, filled with a raw, almost possessive hunger. "Then we'll figure it out together," he declared, his voice resolute. "Whatever comes our way, whatever complications arise, we'll face them together." Agreed? I should have said no, but I couldn't. Agreed, I whispered, my voice trembling. And when he kissed me there, in the hallway of his mother's care facility, it felt less like a beginning and more like an undeniable inevitability. The weeks that followed were a delicate dance, a precarious balancing act between breathtaking breakthroughs and heartbreaking setbacks. Professional progress and a burgeoning personal entanglement that deepened exponentially with each passing day. My research with Sanaa continued to yield astonishing results. Results that would have made my former colleagues weep with professional envy. The bridging technique proved consistently effective enough that we established a structured routine. Each morning, I would enter Sanaa's room first. She would find Maria, we would engage in conversation. Then, Enzo would join us, consistently introduced as a friend of mine. And Sanaa would accept him with a gentle, almost childlike tolerance. No full recognition, not the joyous reunion Enzo so desperately craved, but still contact, connection, infinitely better than the screaming and terror that had defined their relationship for the past 2 agonizing years. I meticulously documented every detail with unwavering scientific rigor, recording detailed protocols, precise observations, and even the most incremental improvements, building a compelling case study that had the potential to revolutionize emotional memory approaches in Alzheimer's patients. For the first time since my funding had vanished, I felt like a legitimate researcher again, like my work truly mattered. But my work wasn't the only thing consuming my thoughts. Enzo and I were exceptionally careful, bordering on paranoid. We had to be. The facility staff couldn't, under any circumstances, discover the true nature of our burgeoning relationship. and Enzo's associates. The shadowy network that operated just beyond the periphery of my vision, the network I tried desperately not to think about. They most certainly couldn't know. So, we existed in stolen moments and secret spaces. Late nights spent whispering secrets in the library when the rest of the house was dark and still. Early mornings in the sprawling gardens, walking among the fragrant roses as the first rays of sunlight crept over the horizon. Fleeting whispered conversations, furtive, almost accidental touches, a gnawing hunger that grew more intense the more we desperately tried to contain it. He confided in me during those quiet, intimate hours. I suspected he had never revealed these things to another living soul. He told me about the first time he had taken a life, at the tender age of 17, defending his mother from ruthless men who had come to collect his deceased father's unpaid debt. He told me about the relentless years of violence that followed, a slow, inexorable accumulation of power that had transformed him from a terrified boy into the man that everyone now feared. He revealed the profound loneliness of leadership, the constant demands, the endless expectations, and the crushing realization that no one ever simply wanted him. I listened without judgment, offering only silent support. I had made peace with who he was the moment I agreed to move into his house. I couldn't rewrite his past. I couldn't erase the blood from his hands, but I could see the man beneath the monstrous facade, the scared little boy who had loved his mother with such unwavering ferocity. He had become something terrible to protect her, and I couldn't, in good conscience, condemn him for it. In return, I shared my own painful past. A childhood spent adrift in the foster care system, shuffled between countless homes, never truly belonging anywhere. The extraordinary grandmother who had taken me in at the age of 15, the only person who had ever made me feel truly wanted, the woman who had tragically succumbed to Alzheimer's disease while I was still in graduate school. I spoke of the years of relentless research that had followed, driven by a desperate, all-consuming need to understand the insidious disease that had stolen the only family I had ever known. We were both orphans in our own unique ways, both shaped by profound loss into something far more complex and undeniably sharper than we might otherwise have been. Maybe that's why we recognized something of ourselves in each other. Perhaps that's why the intense connection between us felt less like falling in love and more like finally coming home. It was during the 6th week that the outside world, the dark, menacing world Enzo had tried so desperately to shield me from, finally intruded on our fragile paradise. I was in the library, meticulously reviewing notes from that morning's session with Sana, when Enzo suddenly appeared in the doorway. One glance at his face was enough to tell me that something was terribly wrong. The gentle softness I had grown accustomed to seeing had vanished, replaced by the hard, cold mask of the man he was to everyone else in his world. "We need to talk," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. I immediately set aside my notes, my heart pounding in my chest. What happened? He closed the library door with a soft click, then moved to the window, turned back to me, his broad shoulders rigid with tension. "There's a situation. Business. Something I've been managing for months has finally come to a head." He paused, took a deep, steadying breath. "I have to leave tonight. I don't know for how long." The words struck me harder than I could have anticipated. In the past 6 weeks, we had never been apart for more than a few fleeting hours. The thought of him being gone, not knowing where he was or when he would return, sent a sharp, agonizing ache through my chest. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. "I can't tell you," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "The less you know, the safer you are." I stood up, moving towards him, desperate to close the growing distance between us. "Enzo, what's going on? You have to tell me." He turned to face me fully, and I saw the internal conflict raging within his eyes. The part of him that desperately wanted to protect me by keeping me in the dark warring with the part that had, in recent weeks, grown accustomed to sharing everything, no matter how painful. "There are people who want what I have," he finally confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "Territory, business, power. They've been making calculated moves for months, testing my defenses, searching for any sign of weakness. And now it seems they found one." A cold wave of dread washed over me, settling like a stone in the pit of my stomach. What weakness, Enzo? What are you talking about? He remained silent for a long, agonizing moment, then spoke very quietly. You. The word hung in the air, heavy and pregnant with unspoken meaning. Me? I repeated, my voice barely audible. Word has gotten out that I've taken an interest in someone, he explained, his jaw tightening. That a woman is residing in my house, spending a significant amount of time at my mother's facility. Someone who matters to me in a way that no one has in a very long time. His gaze intensified, burning into me. In my world, Elena, that makes you a target. And it makes me vulnerable. I should have been terrified. Any rational person would have been paralyzed by fear. But what I felt was a burning, white-hot anger. Anger at a world that could take something as pure and simple as love and twist it into a weapon. Anger at the faceless enemies who were threatening to destroy the fragile peace we had so painstakingly constructed. So, what do? I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. I handle it, he stated, his voice resolute. I eliminate the threat before it can touch you or my mother. But that means leaving, going underground, dealing with this personally. He crossed the room to me, his movements swift and purposeful. He took both of my hands in his grip surprisingly firm. I need you to promise me something, Elena. What? I asked, searching his eyes. Stay here. Don't go to the facility alone. Luca will assign guards, men I trust with my life. Don't leave the estate. Don't contact anyone outside this house. Don't do anything that could possibly draw attention to yourself. His grip tightened, his knuckles turning white. I can't focus on what I need to do if I'm constantly worried about your safety. I need to know you're safe. The gilded cage I had walked into willingly suddenly felt claustrophobic, infinitely smaller. But I saw the fear lurking beneath his commanding tone, the very real terror of losing something precious, and my anger slowly subsided. I promise, I said softly, squeezing his hands in return. But you have to promise me something too, Enzo. Anything, he replied without hesitation. Come back, I pleaded, my voice trembling. Whatever you have to do, whatever it costs you, please, come back to me. He pulled me into his arms then, holding me with a desperation that spoke volumes more than any words could have conveyed. I buried my face in his chest, inhaling his familiar scent, desperately trying to memorize the feeling of his strong body pressed against mine. I will, he murmured into my hair, his voice thick with emotion. I will always come back to you, Elena. Promise. He left that night, disappearing into the inky black interior of a waiting car that swallowed him whole and carried him away into a world I could never fully comprehend. I watched from the window until the car's tail lights vanished into the darkness, then stood there long afterward, staring blankly at nothing, feeling the crushing weight of his absence. The house felt impossibly enormous without him. Empty. Every shadow seemed to lengthen, every silence pregnant with an unspoken threat. I retreated to my room and tried to sleep, but my mind refused to quiet. I kept replaying his words in my head, thinking about the faceless enemies who saw me as a vulnerability, about Enzo somewhere out in the night, battling unimaginable threats, about Sana alone in her facility without either of us to comfort her. Sana. The thought struck me with the force of a physical blow. Enzo had explicitly instructed me not to go to the facility alone, but Sana desperately needed consistency. Our morning sessions were the only thing keeping her stable, the only thing preserving her lucidity. If I disappeared for days, or even weeks, all of our painstaking progress could unravel, leaving her trapped in a permanent state of confusion and fear. I couldn't allow that to happen. I couldn't let Enzo's enemies steal that from us, too. I made a decision. Perhaps it was foolish, perhaps it was exactly the kind of reckless risk Enzo had begged me not to take. But I had spent my entire life being careful, invisible, safe. And where had that gotten me? Alone in a foster care system that had never truly wanted me. Alone in a scientific career that had abandoned me when I needed it most. Alone in a world that had never had a place for someone like me. Enzo had given me something I had never possessed before. A home, a purpose, a love that was actually worth fighting for. I wasn't going to cower in a gilded cage while everything we had built together crumbled around me. I would go to Sanaa in the morning, maintain our carefully established routine, and protect the fragile bridge to her lost memories. And I would trust that Enzo would do whatever he needed to do to keep us all safe. We were partners now, united in love, united in danger, and united in whatever the future held. I just had to survive long enough for him to come back to me. Morning arrived gray and oppressively cold, the unrelenting autumn leaching what little color remained from the world. I dressed carefully, choosing practical clothing, and met Luca in the grand foyer. He was a towering mountain of a man, silent and ever watchful, with eyes that missed nothing and a fierce loyalty to Enzo that bordered on religious devotion. "The boss said you'd want to go to the facility," Luca said, his voice a low rumble, making it clear that it wasn't a question. "Sanaa needs me," I replied, my voice firm. "The routine is crucial. It matters." He studied me intently, something that might have been respect flickering briefly across his granite features. Then he nodded, his movements economical and precise. "We go together. You don't leave my sight. Understood?" "Understood," I affirmed. The drive to the facility felt unnaturally long. Familiar streets had been transformed into potential ambush points by my newly awakened paranoia. But we arrived without incident, and I walked into Sanaa's room, with Luca positioned just outside the door like a silent, unyielding sentinel. I was awake, sitting up, my dark eyes glued to the window, reflecting an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't the familiar fog of confusion, nor the stark terror that sometimes gripped her. This was something else entirely, a strange, almost unsettling anticipation. "Maria," she rasped, her voice catching my attention. But it was different, imbued with a strength and clarity I hadn't heard in years. "I've been waiting for you." I settled beside her, instinctively reaching for her hand. But instead of the usual torrent of fragmented memories, Sanaa remained silent. Her gaze was intense, studying my face with a piercing focus that sent a shiver down my spine. "You're in danger," she declared abruptly, the words striking me like a plunge into ice-cold water. Sanaa rarely acknowledged the present, her mind lost in the labyrinth of the past, a jumbled landscape of fading recollections. For her to speak of now, of me, of danger, it was unheard of. "What do you mean, Sanaa?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. She gripped my hand with surprising strength, her knuckles white. "The boy with sad eyes. He loves you, but love makes people do foolish things. Makes them visible when they should stay hidden." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in my chest. "Sanaa, do you know who I am? Where are you?" A slow, knowing smile spread across her face. And for a fleeting moment, I glimpsed the woman she must have been before the ravages of time and disease, before decades of heartbreaking loss had taken their toll. Sharp, intelligent, formidable. "I know enough," she said, her voice firm. "I know my son has finally found someone worth protecting. And I know some people will use that against him." "My son," she'd said. "My son." "Sanaa," I breathed, my voice thick with emotion. "You remember him? You remember Enzo?" Clarity flickered in her eyes, a fragile flame in the darkness, like a guttering candle on the verge of being extinguished. "Enzo, my boy, my beautiful, terrible boy." Tears streamed down her weathered cheeks, carving paths through the wrinkles etched by time and sorrow. "I tried so hard to save him." She paused, and a dry cough racked her body. "But you can't save someone from their own blood." I was crying, too, tears of relief and disbelief mingling with a profound sense of awe. This wasn't the fleeting partial recognition we'd managed to achieve through bridging techniques. This was something deeper, something more profound. This was Sanaa, fully present, fully aware, somehow breaking through the impenetrable fog of her disease with a force of will that seemed impossible. "He loves you," I told her, my voice choked with emotion. "He loves you so much. It's destroying him to lose you." "I know," she whispered, her voice raspy. She reached up, her trembling fingers tracing the contours of my face. "That's why I held on. All these months of darkness, confusion, fear. I held on because I could feel him, waiting, hoping. She drew a shuddering breath, her body trembling. But I'm tired, Maria. So tired. Elena, I said softly, my voice gentle. My name is Elena. She smiled again, that knowing, ancient smile that hinted at secrets untold. I know who you are, child. I've always known. From the first moment you walked into my room, I could feel it. The same heart, the same fire. Maria would have loved you. The door burst open, the sudden intrusion shattering the fragile moment. Luca filled the doorway, his face tight with urgency, his eyes scanning the room. We need to go. Now. I stood, my hands still clasped in Sanaa's. What's happening? Situation escalated, Luca said, his voice clipped and tense. Boss is on his way back, but there's been a breach. They know you're here. Fear flooded through me. A cold, electric current that coursed through my veins. But underneath the fear was something else. A steely resolve that hardened my heart. Determination. I promised Enzo I'd stay safe. I'd promised myself I would protect what we had built together. The sanctuary of love and hope we had fought so hard to create. I looked down at Sanaa, at this extraordinary woman who had clawed her way back to lucidity, back from the depths of her broken mind, to warn me, to grant me this precious moment. I have to go, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my hands. But I'll come back. Promise. She squeezed my hand one final time, her grip surprisingly strong. Protect my son. He thinks he's the strong one, but he's not. He breaks just like everyone else. Be the one who holds him together. I will. I vowed. My voice filled with conviction. Luca pulled me toward the door, his hand firm on my arm. But Sanaa's voice stopped us both in our tracks. Luca. He turned, his expression softening as he faced her. And I saw something I never expected to see on his brutal face. Tenderness, respect. Yes, Sonora? He asked, his voice surprisingly gentle. Bring her back to my boy, she said, her gaze unwavering. Whatever it takes. He nodded once, a silent promise etched on his face. Then, with a final, lingering look at Sanaa, we were moving, hurtling through corridors that had suddenly become enemy territory, toward an exit that might or might not be safe. My mind raced, fear and hope and love tangled together into a complex knot I couldn't untangle, couldn't name. Somewhere, Enzo was fighting to get back to me, battling his way through the darkness. Somewhere behind, Sanaa was fighting to hold on to the precious clarity that had cost her everything. And I was caught between them, the fragile bridge connecting son to mother, man to humanity. The car waited outside, the engine rumbling like a caged beast. Luca pushed me into the back seat, shielding me with his body as we peeled away from the building, the tires screeching against the asphalt. I heard shouts behind us, the sharp crack of gunfire, the pursuing screech of tires, but I didn't look back, couldn't look back. Only forward, toward whatever awaited us, toward Enzo, toward home. My phone buzzed, a single message from an unknown number. Asterisk, I'm coming for you. Hold on. I clutched the phone to my chest, the words a lifeline in the storm. Sanaa's words echoed in my mind. A solemn charge. Asterisk, protect my son. Be the one who holds him together. I would. Whatever it took, however this ended, we were in this together now, and together we would survive. The morning light filtered through the window of Sanaa's room, painting the walls with warm, golden hues. It fell across the photographs that adorned every surface, each one a captured moment, a stolen memory. But today there was something new. A framed picture of the three of us, Sanaa, Enzo, and me sat proudly on the bedside table, nestled amongst the other cherished mementos. It had been taken just last week, during one of her increasingly frequent lucid periods. In the photo, she was holding both our hands, her smile radiant, her eyes clear and bright. She knew us that day, not as Maria and her friend, but as Elena and Enzo, as her son and the woman who loved him. It only lasted an hour before the fog descended again, obscuring her mind and stealing her back into the shadows. But we had that hour. We had that photograph. We have more good days now than bad. The breakthrough we achieved isn't a cure. There is no cure for what afflicts her. But it's something. It's a connection. A fragile thread that binds us together. It's peace. A fleeting respite from the relentless storm of her illness. It's the gift of seeing recognition in her eyes, of witnessing a spark of the woman she once was, even if only in flashes, even if only sometimes. The threats Enzo dealt with that night are gone now, banished back into the darkness from whence they came. He won't tell me the details of what he did, of the sacrifices he made. And I don't ask. All I know is that he came back to me, just as he promised, his love a beacon in the night. That Luca got me to safety, keeping his silent vow. That we survived together, bound by our promises. I've returned to research, but not at a prestigious university, not chasing accolades or recognition. I work here at this facility, named in honor of Sanaa, dedicating my life to understanding the mysteries of the human mind. I'm meticulously documenting everything. The protocols we developed, the breakthroughs we achieved, and the compelling evidence that emotional memory persists, a flickering ember, even when everything else is lost. It will help thousands of families, offering them a glimmer of hope in their darkest hours. It already has. Enzo is here every morning now, a constant presence, just like me. We do the bridging together, a shared act of love and devotion. And Sanaa accepts him not with fear or confusion, but with gentle affection, a quiet recognition that soothes my soul. She calls him the boy with sad eyes more often than she calls him Enzo, but she's not afraid. She reaches out and holds his hand, her touch soft and reassuring. She listens to his voice, her eyes following his every move. She smiles at him, a genuine, heartfelt smile that melts away the years of pain and loss. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes, she calls him her son, the word a precious jewel whispered from the depths of her heart. I'm writing a paper about our findings, pouring my heart and soul into every word. Emotional memory persistence and advanced Alzheimer's disease. A case study of pattern recognition and therapeutic bridging. My former colleagues are already calling it groundbreaking, heralding it as a paradigm shift in the understanding of the disease. Funding organizations are reaching out, eager to support our work. Universities want to replicate our protocols, to spread our knowledge and replicate our successes. But those things don't matter as much as they once did. The accolades, the recognition, the grants, they all pale in comparison to the real rewards. What matters is the way Sanaa's face lights up with pure, unadulterated joy when I walk into her room each morning, her eyes sparkling with recognition. What matters is the way Enzo can sit with his mother, holding her hand, without her screaming in terror. What matters is that we found a way to reach someone everyone said was unreachable, to break through the barriers of disease and despair. What matters is love, in all its complicated, painful, beautiful forms. Today, I enter her room to find her already awake, sitting by the window, bathed in sunlight, looking out at the gardens below. She turns when she hears my footsteps, and her face transforms with joy. "Maria," she says, her voice clear and strong. And I no longer correct her. I've learned that Maria is who she needs me to be, the identity that brings her comfort and peace. That being Maria allows her to connect, to remember, to feel loved. That love doesn't always look the way we expect it to, but it is always there, waiting to be discovered. "I'm here," I say, taking her hand in mine. "I knew you would come," she replies, her smile radiant. Then, she looks past my shoulder, her gaze softening. "And you brought the boy with sad eyes." Enzo steps into the room, his face etched with a mixture of hope and apprehension. But Sanaa doesn't flinch. She holds out her other hand to him, a gesture of unconditional love. And when he takes it, a sigh of contentment escapes her lips. "His eyes are less sad today," she observes, her voice gentle. "Yes, I agree," my voice thick with emotion, looking at the man I love. "They are." We sit there together, the three of us, connected by invisible threads of memory and emotion and stubborn, relentless hope. Outside, The world continues its complicated dance of violence and beauty, loss and redemption. But here, in this small room, we've carved out something precious, a sanctuary of love and understanding. We found a way back to each other, and that, I've learned, is everything. Sanaa falls asleep with both our hands in hers, her face peaceful, her breathing steady. Enzo and I sit in silence, watching her rest, grateful for every moment, every lucid period, every small victory. "Thank you," he says quietly, his voice filled with emotion, "for not giving up, for seeing what no one else could see, for loving us both enough to fight. Always," I tell him, my voice unwavering. "And I mean it, because some bridges are worth building, no matter how impossible they seem. Some loves are worth fighting for, no matter how complicated they are. Some people are worth saving, even when they think they're beyond salvation. And some connections, like the one between a mother and her son, between the living and the dead, between who we were and who we become, are stronger than any disease, any threat, any force that tries to break them." Sanaa taught me that. Enzo taught me that. And every morning, when I walk into this room and see that flash of recognition in a dying woman's eyes, I'm reminded of why I became a scientist in the first place. Not to publish papers or win grants or prove theories, but to build bridges, to create a connection, to help love find its way home. Even when home is a memory, even when love is complicated, even when the bridge crosses an impossible distance, we find a way. We always find a way.